And finally, we have elevation. Now, elevation is all about differences in elevation, like difference in altitude, slope, which way the slope faces. You know, we call that aspect. There's a difference between a south-facing aspect and a north-facing aspect. It's particularly important if you're working with water, elevation, because you want to try and use water without having to pump it, if at all possible, just to move it by gravity. Yeah, and elevation, again, is one of those things that needs to be balanced. I mean, the thing about the key planning tools is they all need to be balanced one with the other. You know, you'll find different imperatives coming up from the four concepts, and then you might find that there's a conflict, and then you have to choose which one is going to be the most important. So here we had a situation where a friend of mine, there's his house, over here was his market garden, so he was walking backwards and forwards every day to work in the market garden. And then there was a piece of ground here that was completely unused on top of a bank. There's a steep bank, and on top of it there was a sort of relatively flat piece of ground that was never used for anything. So he didn't have a herb garden, so he made his herb garden up there. And that herb garden was a complete failure. Never worked. It hardly ever got harvested, and weeds grew up, and in the end he abandoned it and replanted over here, further away from the house, but on that path that he always walked along every day to go to work. So although this was further away from the house, in zoning terms actually it was much more accessible. So slopes are very important in terms of accessibility. What I always say to people is, if you want to know how steep a slope is, walk up the slope and down again, then get a log, heavy log, put it on your shoulder and walk up that slope and down again, and then you will know how steep that slope is. And much more important than sort of measuring the slope. Okay, sometimes we need to measure it mathematically for various reasons, as we'll see later on in the week. But that, you know, that teaches you so much. Your body can teach you so much. So that's elevation. So we have all four. And any questions?
Well, I had one question. I don't know if it's relevant to what we're talking about. All the houses here are built in valleys and not on hills. Is there a particular reason? I mean, why would you not build your house on a hill?
It's the wind, really.
Yeah.
You know, this is a very windy country, because we're always, wherever you are, you're quite near the sea. And yeah, it's, I mean, these days you can build a house that is completely sealed, and once you're inside it, you can't feel any of the wind outside. But old traditional houses were very leaky, and that's the reason. I mean, most old houses, like this farmhouse here, you'll see it's not on top of the hill, but it's not at the bottom of the valley either. Very often you'll see the old ones sort of halfway down the slope, which we often call the key area, or the key point, because you're below the wind but you're above the frost, because, you know, cold air sinks and frost tends to collect in the lowest places. The most wonderful placement I've seen is in Brittany, where all the traditional farmhouses face south. You know, they tend to be longer in one dimension than the other, and that long dimension faces south. And you could be walking around in Brittany, if you could be completely lost, and it could be a cloudy, misty day, and you can't see the sun, but you could find your way. You could tell which way is north, just simply by looking at the traditional houses. I think that's excellent. And why everybody doesn't do that, I do not know, because it makes a big difference to the amount of passive solar gain that the house receives.